Efka, I've got to say, I'm pretty bummed out that I wasn't able to make it to UK Games Expo this year.
I think you should be, because it is now officially the third largest board game convention in the world.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, I saw a bunch of the photos online. You were having so much fun. You're like hanging out in bars, playing games with people, and I almost went this year, but hopefully I'll make it next year.
Have you seen our video coverage of Expo?
I did. I watched the whole thing.
It was very stupid, and it very accurately reflected my behavior there, because I was just a buffoon, really, throughout the entire show. Everyone was being very professional about everything. You know, there were a lot of YouTube people with, like, cameras doing interviews and stuff like that. And I was like, I'll just shoot some stuff and then overlay it with a voiceover, and it'll be fine. And it kind of was, because actually that video is doing better than a lot of our reviews. So there you go.
It seems like it was also a bit of a tribute to your friendship with John Perkis.
Yes. We hung out a lot, actually. And that was really cool, because John is, according to Rado, not as funny in real life. But actually he is. He's a really fun guy to hang out with. And you can see why he's like a professional comedy writer, because it seems like John at times just has like a joke ready for any given situation. And it's quite offbeat as well. And you just end up laughing without knowing that you were gonna laugh. Isn't that how all jokes work? I don't know. See, I'm not as funny as him.
Well, we haven't hung out in like 4 weeks, so I'm glad we're able to at least hang out now here on episode 9 of Last Place. It's good to get together.
Yes. If you don't know who we are, I am Efka, and the other person talking is
Jonathan Cox. We both do YouTube channels, but you hopefully know that by now.
Yes, hopefully. And also at Expo, I really wanted to pick up a game called Baron Park. Yeah, and I'm not... Okay, so the title is in German. It means Bear Park. And I couldn't pick it up because there were only 35 copies. And I'm like, I really want this game. So Baron Park is like a game about laying down polyominoes, which is like Tetris-shaped pieces, but not quite, because Tetris-shaped pieces have to have 4 bits and polyominoes could have more or less. Anyway, I really wanted to pick it up because it looked cool, and Cottage Garden was another game that looked cool and had that same thing going, but Cottage Garden disappointed me a little bit, and I wanted to check it out. And actually, the reason I'm talking about it is that it just came through the door, like literally just before we started recording this podcast. And I opened it, and I am happy to report that Baron Park is the first game that features a porta potty tile. I've never encountered another game that features a porta potty tile. If you have, and you're a listener, please write in at lastplacepodcast@gmail.com and let us know about any other games that feature porta potties. But I will say straight up that even if you have one, Baron Park probably beats it, because it doesn't just have tiles that feature one porta potty, it has tiles that feature 2 porta potties.
And here I was thinking it'd just be about bears.
Well, no, yeah. In a way, you know, it's like Ulysses of the board game world. Ulysses being the first novel to ever feature someone going to the toilet in literature. And Baron Park is the first board game to feature a porta potty.
Well, there you go. Grace our Gmail account with some high quality board gaming porta potty content.
Yeah, please do, and we'll read it all out on the next episode.
Let's talk about a game that you've actually played, as opposed to one you've just ogled the bits for. You gave a shot to Lorenzo El Magnifico just a couple days ago, right?
I did. Lorenzo is a Euro game. Surprise, a lot of games are. But it comes from Simone Luciani, who was a co-designer of Tolkien, and then later Voyages of Marco Polo, and then later Grand Austria Hotel. So actually coming back to another Simone Luciani game felt very, very, very familiar, because it shares a lot of the tropes with those other games that I just mentioned before. So if you have played any of them, you will certainly find things that are somewhat similar, at least in style.
So what's going on here?
Well, okay, so you play a Renaissance time family that is trying to accrue, I don't know, wealth, power, points. Essentially points. You're trying to get a lot of points. And the way you do that is by not getting excommunicated.
That's true. The church plays a pretty big role in this game.
Yeah, because so one of the striking things about Lorenzo Magnifico, and I guess in some regards also Grand Austria Hotel had that, is that unless you're able to pay off this resource that is really hard to get, and in this game it's 5 points, at certain times in the game, you're going to get massively penalized by the game telling you that, hey, remember this really useful thing that you could do before? Well, you can't anymore. But I don't know, it's just thematically really funny that they chose excommunication because, hey, excommunication is like, you know, like a pretty harsh thing that happened to people. But also at the same time, you don't just get excommunicated once, like you get excommunicated 3 times.
Up to 3 times.
In the course of the
or
game.
You get excommunicated and then they're like, oh, you can come back in. You still can't do that other thing, but we'll allow you to do this thing. Yeah, I mean, from a mechanical perspective, this is it's a worker placement game. But it does, most Euro games, we hope, have a catch, like something that they do that's slightly different than other games. And the catch, the selling point for this game is that it's a dice worker placement game, but everybody has the same pips on their dice. So everybody has these workers that are just a color. And then you roll these, I think 3 different colored dice in the middle of the table. And you just leave those out for the whole round, and that means that everybody's orange worker is going to have the value of whatever that orange die was. So, I mean, there have been lots of dice placement games before, but you all roll your own dice, and like my orange die might be a 3, and yours might be a 5, and you have to play off of that. So here, it's kind of a neat little twist, I suppose. Like having, you roll the dice, and you're like, oh wow, the white die is really low this round, so that's going to apply to everybody. And of course, there are things you can get rid of to modify this stuff.
Yeah, but unlike actually the previous games by the same designer, Grand Austria Hotel and Voyages of Marco Polo, which have both been dice placement games, the difference here is that the dice value doesn't dictate how good your action is going to be. It is simply a restriction on certain action spaces. So certain action spaces will say you need a very high die to go here, and others will say you'll need a very low die to go here. So I will come out straight away and say that I have enjoyed Lorenzo Magnifico, but the reason I have enjoyed it was probably more because I was just having a very nice time. And full disclosure, a friend of mine brought over a few German beers, and those particular beers were on the strong side. And even though I did not partake so much in the beer, the strength of the beer kind of took me by surprise. So I might have been having fun because of that. But
did it make excommunication go down a little smoother?
Yeah, I was never excommunicated, actually. I was the only player who was not excommunicated at any point. I also lost, interestingly. But again, that might have been the beer. But none of the other people who were playing with me enjoyed the game that much, including
How many players was it?
3 players.
Okay.
And I think the reason for that is, once again, a common trope between all of Simone Luciani's designs, which is that the game is incredibly punishing. And it means that action spaces are very tight. So there's only one thing that gives you the thing that you want. And if someone else goes there, that's it. Say goodbye to it. And then other action spaces are a little bit more free. And but if someone, like, they're kind of grouped up into clusters, and if someone else went into one cluster, then you have to pay extra money to go there as well. And once again, money is a resource, and like any other resource in this game, it's incredibly rare and precious.
Well, there's one way to think about it, and that is that this is also an engine building game. Like a big part of what you're doing with the worker placement is just grabbing new pieces to your engine. And that's fun, and that's, you get there, you grab that thing that somebody else wanted. But like you were saying, if you want to run that engine, you have to activate a very rare a spot on the board that, like you said, is going to be hotly contested. So it's this weird thing where you can build a cool engine, see how all the parts interlock, and then not be able to start it up because people keep getting in your way.
And that was another thing. Yeah, like you want to run this engine, and it reminds me of your review of Oh My Goods, where again, like, you have this thing that does a thing that you've built. And the really cool thing about the game is that you start off just like everyone else. Actually, there's a variant where it adds a little bit of asymmetry to every player board, but it's very marginal. And you get to actually progress through the game in a way that you design yourself. And you become your playstyle becomes very different to other players. And actually, one of the cool things that happened in the game was that a lot of the times when I did something, people would say, wait a minute, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah, because I got this thing earlier on. And they're like, oh, come on, I wanted that thing, right? And everyone wants everything because everything that you get in this game is so cool, and it kind of breaks the rules of the game in very interesting ways. So, for example, you could get a card that says that from now on, whenever you take this type of card, treat your die value as 3 pips higher than everyone else. And you're like, oh, okay, so I can take these cards a lot easier than everyone else, which is pretty neat. But then at the same time, it still doesn't quite come together at the end. And I feel like you need to be really experienced at this game for it all to fall into place because of how tight it is. And I also felt a little bit like in the last round, there were so many things that scored me points. Like I could do almost anything, but because in the last round, all the dice that we rolled, like the free dice that set the values for the round that we rolled were pretty low, like almost no one could pick up anything. And we're like, how do we just do a thing that will get us points, like out of all these options that we have available to us? Because we're either lacking resources for one, or we're not high enough on this military track for the other, or something somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I've definitely been in situations where, like, you're all at the table and you're like, does anybody see a good move? I'm not seeing a good move. Does anybody see it? Am I just...
Yeah, and the table is full of riches, right? Like, it's just an abundance of stuff that you wish you could have. And this is hard to get. So again, this is first impressions. I've only played this game once, and it is entirely possible that if you keep at it, you become a lot better at this game. And what I did really like about it is that the rules actually are very light and easy to explain. And a lot of the heaviness of the rules is front-loaded onto the cards. So the cards are the things that will mostly basically give you all these cool abilities. And whilst you were playing the game, you do have to kind of, sit down with other people and go, hey, what does this do? And what does that do? And can we figure out how exactly this card works? But that's fine. I think at least it engenders conversation between players. That's true. Which is more than other Euros do, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've only played this game once as well. I played it at Board Game Geek Con last year, and we had kind of a similar situation to you, where I played it with Jessica, my wife, and a couple of my friends. And Jessica really liked it. She steamrolled us. I did very poorly, but I could I felt like I really wanted to play it again, and I haven't had the opportunity to because it just hasn't really been out in English. But I wanted to try it again because I could see all this potential for engine building and whatnot. And my other couple friends were much more lukewarm about it, and they actually ended up playing it again at BGGCon and kind of went away from it saying it just wasn't for them. And I think a large part of that was they felt it was rather punishing. But another big thing that was brought up by one of my friends is that they felt like going fourth. They actually went fourth in both of the games, and they felt like they were at a humongous disadvantage right from the very beginning because of the way that the board, like, it is so contentious trying to take all these worker placement spots and trying to take these engine building pieces. And sure, I believe in this game you can essentially lose one of your actions to take the first player marker for a future round, but their argument was that it felt a little bit overly painful being later on in turn order. I can't quite comment on that, but I can say that this game does appear to be polarizing. Jessica really liked it, but that being said, it was a 4-player game, and all of us who were not named Jessica kind of tied our shoes in a knot together and stumbled over right in the very beginning by getting excommunicated in such a way that it was incredibly difficult for us to activate one of the 2 main engines on our player board, which meant for the rest of the game, Jessica was able to keep activating that spot with impunity because it was prohibitively expensive for the rest of us to do it because, again, we kind of accidentally got excommunicated. And so I wonder, I do want to play this one again. I want to see what it's like where I play a little bit better and I try to get my things aligned in such a way that we can actually have the contention over activating that engine spot. But I will easily admit that this is a polarizing game and certainly a punishing one.
Can I just say that actually the player who got excommunicated all 3 times won the game yesterday? And I think that's very interesting. And what I've noticed is, so first of all, excommunication happens 3 times per game. And it basically after the 2nd, 4th, and 6th round, you just check to see whether you can pay off a certain amount of faith points. And if you can, you're not excommunicated. or you can choose to not pay those points. Because later on, the higher you are on the faith points track, the more points you're going to get at the end of the game. So the player decided, I'm actually going to get excommunicated because the things that it's going to stop me from doing, like, I'm fine with that. I can build my strategy in a way where it doesn't revolve around those things. And I'm just going to keep those points and keep getting points from other things. And the game is so pointality that almost anything you do will give you points. And the other thing is that every time you play the game, the excommunication tiles are going to be different because there's just loads of them in the box and you only draw out 3. And so I think a lot of the game is actually establishing, can I build a strategy around getting excommunicated and just getting away with it and making sure that the action spots or the abilities that it denies me are never going to impede on what I actually want to do.
Yep, I totally agree. So I'm looking forward to playing this one again. I don't know if it's going to set my world on fire, but I think it's got some interesting stuff. And my first impression was one of intrigue. It sounds like you're in a similar boat, but your friends are not.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's, once again, the same thing about Euros. There's so many out there, and so many of them are really good. Why would I not play... I mean, I know you don't like Great Western Trail so much, but why would I not play Great Western Trail over it? Or why would I not play Yokohama over it? Which I know you love Yokohama, right?
I did, yeah. Yep, that's a good point. Well, speaking of Euros and what they can do for the overall German industry, we got the Spiel des Jahres nominees that happened a couple weeks ago. And one of those 3 is called Wettlauf nach El Dorado, which means race to El Dorado. And I'm just going to call it El Dorado at this point.
It sounds like a good decision that you've made there.
Yes. I'm just going to stop tripping over my mouth there. Interestingly enough, I've been interested in this one for a month or two because, well, it's a Rainer Knizia game. And I'm pretty middle of the bell curve when it comes to him. Like, some people love him, some people hate him. I've liked some stuff and disliked other things. I think he does some pretty interesting things. And my button in my Amazon.de browser, I was hovering my mouse over the buy this game button one day, a couple weeks ago, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to hold off. And the next morning, I look at Twitter, and it's announced that the Spiel des Jahres nominees have been announced, and El Dorado is one of them. And so I furiously go back to Amazon.de, and it's completely sold out. And I was like, God, just yesterday, I was like a fraction of a second away from just clicking the button and being like, well, it's done. So anyway, I put in the order again, and it got fulfilled a couple weeks later. And I've actually played it 3 times at this point. I'm hoping to record a playthrough of it. And well, this is a racing deck building game. And to the best of my knowledge, I think this is the first time Rainer Knizia has taken on deck building. Do you know of any other ones?
No, but I will have to admit that I'm not a very big Knizia expert. I actually have played very few of his games to the point where I can't even recall one that I've played.
Holy cow. Okay.
I know, right?
I mean, he's made a lot of games. And
like over 600 or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that going into that, from my perspective of Rainer Knizia, it seems like he doesn't make new stuff very much anymore. It seems like a big thing that he does is he takes other people's ideas and he streamlines them, he refines them down, and he puts out his own version. He has Indigo, which is his version of Sorrow, for instance. And in this case, it seems like this is kind of his take on Dominion. But this time, instead of just narrowing it down and streamlining it to just the deck building bit, this is also a race game. And realistically, I think this is a racing game with an engine building engine tacked onto the side, as opposed to being primarily an engine building game, because what you're doing is you have these really large hexagonal shaped pieces with a bunch of hexagons in the middle of them. You're going to build out onto the table. They kind of network together in various different ways. They're all double-sided, and they depict just crazy forest that you're trying to head through in order to get to the fabled golden city of El Dorado. And what you're doing on your turn, it's really simple from a deck building perspective. You have a hand of 4 cards this time, and you're either going to play a card to do the action on the card, or you're going to play that card to get buying power to purchase new cards to put in your deck.
Wait a minute. How is it that so far that everything you've described about this game, if you took out the words Rainer Knizia and hexagons, I could say you're talking about Clank?
Yes. Okay, no, this is actually very interesting because I played Clank this week for the first time as well. But let's talk about Clank in a little bit.
Yeah.
When it comes to, like, El Dorado is a strictly a race game, and Clank has some race feel, but it also has some push your luck.
Yes.
So in El Dorado, it seems like Reiner Knizia took on, like when he tries to streamline these things, sometimes it almost seems like he does challenges to himself. Like, I'm going to challenge myself to make a deck building game where instead of the usual deck building trope where you're not sure which cards are going to come out and you're going to build your deck differently based on the variety, he said, no, there are going to be 18 cards in this game, and all 18 cards will always be used in every single game. And not only that, you can only have access to 6 of these, and you will always start the game with the same exact 6.
Wow, okay.
Which feels a bit ballsy, right? It's like you're definitely treading on some thin ice when it comes to variability by doing that. But the way it works is that each of these stacks of cards has only 3 of that specific type of card. So they'll get purchased out rather quickly. And when you have these starting 6, which are kind of the easier ones, as soon as there is a hole, then the next person who wants to buy a card can choose one of the 5 that's remaining, or they can grab one of the 12 options that are above and unavailable that are better. And if they buy one of those, they'll take one of the 3 and put the other 2 down into that slot. So it means that each time you play the game, sure, there's the same variety of 18 cards in every single play, but it means that you are going to kind of organically, as a group, find your way through all of the more advanced cards in different ways.
And they cascade, right, onto the available cards board, right? Because of the choices you make. Okay, that's pretty cool.
Exactly. So I've seen games where one card is much more important than another because I've played 3 different maps, and they really will dictate. I mean, this is a game where you need to know when to stop engine building and when to start just running that engine of your deck. In fact, the first game we played, Jessica won by at least a full turn. And it seemed like the second half of the game, she barely did any deck building. She just built a deck that worked really well for the map that we had. And my friends Matt and Claire and myself, we were all like buying all these cool cards. Okay, I'll take this, I'll draw 2 extra cards, I'll do this one, does that other thing. But remember, you play a card to move, or you play a card to purchase a card. And so while we were purchasing all these cards, Jessica just kind of got ahead. And she just stayed ahead, and she won the game. And part of that might be luck of the draw, like she happened to pull the cards that worked for her current position. But if you keep getting lucky, turn after turn after turn after turn, I'd stop saying that it's luck, and I'd start saying that she just built the right engine for that specific map.
Well, I think you're touching here on a very common trope of deck builders, actually, because funnily enough, I was playing Clank yesterday, and I was playing Clank for the first time, and I was playing it with a person who I haven't played much games with before, so it was nice. We were having a nice experience. But here's the thing: at one point, I just went, okay, I have all the cards I want in my deck, and I'm only ever gonna buy a card if I don't mind spending the resources, and like it doesn't really pollute my deck. Like it'll let me draw cards or something like that, right? And it was like, why aren't you spending your resources to buy more cards? And I'm like, well, I don't need to, because this is. My deck's complete. I just now want to run it continuously. And I feel like that's one of the core decisions in any deck building game. Like Star Realms, a very simple deck building game, but that core decision really lies in that game. Do you always buy cards? And the answer is probably no, because you need to know a time when to stop and when to start actually like slimming down your deck and making sure that it does the exact thing that you want it to do. And I think that's one of the most appealing things about deck builders to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. Jessica actually made the same exact point to me when we were discussing El Dorado and Clank, kind of in the same breath, because so both of these games, you have a person on a map, and they move based on how you actually play out your deck of cards. But with El Dorado, the end goal is just get to the end first. You get no points. There are no victory points at all in El Dorado. It's just all a means to an end. Whereas you have Clank, and that one's all about grabbing as much treasure tokens as you can, but also purchasing cards that have victory points on them and just shoving them into your deck. Kind of like Dominion with the provinces, where you could just shove these, I don't know, secret tomes or something like that in your deck that will clog you down. But they're also worth 7 points each for 7 buying power, and that's a really good ratio. And so, to a certain extent, I actually played both of these games for the first time in the same week, which is kind of neat. And I feel like El Dorado was a much more streamlined situation.
Ooh.
Like I felt like I really, if I'm being honest, my first impression of both these games, I definitely preferred El Dorado, and I think part of that is because Clank felt a bit clunky. After El Dorado. I played El Dorado first. And just, this is the thing about Reiner Knizia. Like, I know a lot of people hate it when reviewers throw around the word elegant, but Knizia really does seem to know how to cut everything away and just have this little structure that just whirs, and it just worked. And I've really enjoyed all 3 plays of it. And I'm looking forward to trying Clank again, but it just seemed like when you go from a game like El Dorado where you set the thing up and then you teach it in a breeze and you just go and you're just like, it's so obvious and intuitive. You're just moving and going and moving and going. But then you have Clank where you're like setting it up and you have 5 different types of tokens that have to go on this specific spot and that specific spot. And then you're explaining how there's this whole push your luck element in that game. And then you also have just lots of rules, if that makes sense. And I'm not going to say that Clank is rules heavy compared to other games, but when you compare it to El Dorado, it's like 3 times as many rules for a similar-ish experience. I mean, I talked about this with Jessica, and she felt like it was significantly different. And I do agree that Clank has much more of an Ascension feel. It feels like Ascension, where you're also moving a little dude around because you are getting victory points. It's a victory point race. You're also trying to get out. But for instance, I lost our game of Clank by 3 points, and I did not make it out in time. So I missed out on the 20 bonus points for getting out, and I just barely lost the game. And if I had pulled cards out of my deck differently, I would have won by not actually racing out. So I would agree that Clank is a victory point grab, and El Dorado is just a strict race. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts is that my loins are on fire right now about El Dorado. Because remember earlier on in the beginning of our podcast, in the very early episodes, we reviewed a game called Inish, and Inish is a drafting game. And the one thing that it did is it said, instead of like drafting piles and piles of cards like in Seven Wonders, you have just 17. And actually, like, what those cards do is very key to the game, and you should learn what you're drafting and what you're giving up to your opponents. And by kind of streamlining that, it actually made a very elegant game that you draft the cards with, and then you play an area control game that was also actually pretty like streamlined and elegant. And I really like that. And if El Dorado does that to Clank, then yes, please, I would like to play it. But my question is, would everyone like to play it? Because the one thing that Clank has going for it is, well, the appealing theme, you know, and the whimsy and the humor. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Reiner Knizia is not one known for whimsy.
That's true. There's no real whimsy in this game. I really don't want to be like on the record for saying that El Dorado beats Clank, because I really do feel like they overlap quite a bit when it comes to the Venn diagram, but at the end their goals are pretty different. And yeah, if you're looking for a game with lots of variety with your deck building, where you're going to build a very different deck this game to last game, then Clank is far superior because there's only 18 cards in El Dorado. Your deck is going to be somewhat similar from game to game. You might find yourself doing similar things, but it's more about refining that deck and just getting to perfectly match the given map that you have in front of you. That's the challenge in this specific game. So it feels like there's a lot less whimsy. There's certainly no real storytelling going on there. It's just full of smart decisions that combo well together. I've only played El Dorado 3 times at this point. I feel like if I played it 10 times, I might be desperate for a card variety injection. I won't know until I potentially get to that point. But I will say that after 3 plays, I could see, I haven't sat there being like, oh man, I really wish there were new cards. It's fun to see how these actual cards play, but a big part of that is just knowing the scope of the game, like going into it and knowing that that's the way it is. It's not like Dominion where there's like 3 million different combinations of cards. And, you know, Dominion is all about finding the broken combo with your given set of cards. And a game like Ascension and Clank is all about tactically grabbing the right card as it comes out that happens to work with your current situation. Whereas El Dorado is very much more of a strategic deck builder. Like you're just constantly looking ahead, trying to build your deck just so that it works for that situation. And because it's so built around the strategy, you don't have as much of that tactical, like, oh, well, I'll jump on this because of that kind of thing. I mean, sure, sometimes somebody will unlock a really great card that you couldn't have grabbed otherwise, but it's just a different vibe.
Okay, well, so if I sat you down and right now said we could play 2 games, it was El Dorado or Clank. I know you don't want to answer this question, but like you personally, with your tastes and preferences, what do you choose right now?
I would play El Dorado 3 times before I played Clank.
There we go.
And I actually, I enjoyed Clank that first play. I was, like I said, we played with a beginner board. There's 2 boards in Clank. There's this kind of beginner side and this more advanced side. And it felt like with Clank, we all 4 of us, it was brand new for all of us, we all kind of did the same path for the first third of the game. It took a while for our paths to differentiate because just how the dungeon was built. Like you could only kind of do certain things. And maybe that's because we're all new, and I do want to try Clank with the reverse side to see if it gets more interesting there. But I will admit that first play did not feel super duper interesting. I just kind of went down. I went all the way down. I grabbed the best piece of equipment. I grabbed the 30-point thing. I was one card away from making it out of the dungeon. If I had drawn from my deck just slightly differently, I would have easily won. And I felt like I did not have anywhere near as many. Also, I feel like I was frustrated more often in Clank than I was in El Dorado, because that's another thing. In El Dorado, every single card can be used for purchasing power. The card either is worth 1, 2, or 3, or 4 purchasing power, or it's worth half a purchasing power. So I rarely felt frustrated, like especially in the early to mid game, because you're like, well, okay, well, worst case scenario, I could just dump my whole hand and have a couple buying power, like probably 2 or 3 buying power, and buy a card that's going to be okay. Whereas there were definitely turns in Clank where I was like, I guess I'll move forward once, and I guess I'll buy another mercenary. I forget the exact name of them, but I don't know. I felt like I took on average a lot more cool turns in El Dorado, but I also feel like I'm being overly harsh on Clank after one play. So
it sounds like El Dorado is the card deck building game for those of us who don't like conflict and, don't like getting in each other's faces, and making sure that every time we do something, it's valuable and it progresses us towards our goals. Whereas Clank has a lot more of an emergent narrative. I found actually that, yes, there are moments where I drew some cards and I really wish I'd rather not drawn them because they're not really letting me do what I want to do. But at the same time, there's this kind of narrative emerging in Clank where, okay, so I was greedy and I went for the highest powered artifact, and then I bought a knapsack so I could carry a second artifact, which is basically the main way you score points in Clank. And I got all these high power things, but the other player got out of the dungeon way before me, and they're going to end the game and kill me unless I'm able to get out in time as well. If I do, I'm probably going to win the game because I'm carrying a lot more loot than them. But if I don't, then, and it's all a little bit down to luck sometimes, but also a lot of it is down to how you've played the game in its entirety. So I don't know. Yeah, I think Clank and El Dorado sound both like very good games, but for two different kinds of gamer groups.
I have to disagree.
Oh, no. Okay.
Actually, okay. With specifically one thing you said about El Dorado, this is not a passive game. Because you have your little explorers, and you're running around, and you're not allowed to move through anybody else's explorers. And so, for instance, I actually played my first 2-player game of this yesterday, and in a 2-player game, you each control 2 different pawns. And we had a situation where my opponent kind of went down a more difficult route and stopped in a spot where it was literally a jam point. Like it was a mountain on either side of him, and he had his one explorer in the middle. I also followed behind him, and while I'm moving my other piece, and we keep going these turns, and I'm like, you're not going to move that piece, are you? You're just waiting for me to take the long way around before you move that piece. And he just kind of looked at me with this wry grin. So sure enough, I have a turn where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go the long way around this lake. And I start going, and it's like 3 times as long. And the next turn, he moves that piece. So there is absolutely log jamming that you can do in this game. And that's specifically with a 2-player game, because obviously you can leave one while you move the other one. But in the 3 and 4-player games, there are lots of times where you're like, I could do this or that. I suppose I'll go here and completely hose somebody else so that they have to go the long way around. It's all about efficiency. I mean, it's a Reiner Knizia game. All of his games are masked efficiency math engines. But in this one, you definitely can block. And I think that's why it's probably best at 4 or 2 players, just because of the number of pawns that are out there really block things and force you to adapt. So it's certainly not a passive style game, but everything else you said earlier, I agree with.
Okay. I would just like to go back to 2 things you've mentioned, specifically jam point and log jamming, which are both excellent words. And if you ever opened a jam related business, I suggest you adapt one of these names. Of course, all royalties go to John, although log jamming was a pornographic movie in The Big Lebowski, so maybe that bit's already taken. I don't know.
I think we should move on.
We should move on, but we're not going very far, John, because we are talking about yet another deck building game, and this one's also quite different as well. And it's called Superhot, the card game, and it is based on a video game. And if you've played the video game, you'll know what it's about. So I wouldn't need to tell you, but some haven't, and so I am going to describe what it's about. It's a first-person shooter where you run around and shoot stuff and grab other people's guns, and then you can possess them and become other people, and a single bullet will always kill you, so you don't want to get killed. But here's the trick. When you don't move, time does not move. Well, it moves ever so slowly, but like you're given a lot of time to make decisions. But as soon as you start moving, everything turns into frenetic action. So the way the game is played is by, just stopping for a little bit, planning out what you're going to do, and then quickly executing it, and then stopping again. And so it's like strategy, and then high frenetic action, strategy, high frenetic action. And the publisher Board and Dice decided to make a card game out of that, and not only make a card game out of it, but somehow relay that experience into playing cards. But not just playing cards, solo playing cards. And so here's my thing, John. I've recently had this fascination with solo games. I've never been able to kind of get on with solo gaming, and I know a lot of people are out there who enjoy it, and I really appreciate that they do, but I've never been able to kind of get myself into enjoying that experience as well, and I really wanted to find out why, and I really wanted to find out what makes solo games tick. So I started with Onirim, and boy, did I hate Onirim, because that game seemed very enthusing at first, but you very quickly realize, well, this is just a probability thing. Like, basically, every time you do something, you map out what's the best course of action, and then it's either going to work or not, because card draw, right? And I've got myself very quickly frustrated with that game. And so I wanted a different kind of experience, because Superhot looked like it was doing something different. And it is. So here's the thing. Superhot, like the previous games we just talked about, is a deck building game where you start with a basic deck and then you're able to purchase more cards and then your deck becomes better. But the first thing that it immediately does is that the cards that you purchase won't stay in your deck forever. As in, as soon as you use a card for its ability, it goes back into the main row of cards and just keeps cycling over there. So your deck is never a constant thing. Essentially, what you're trying to do in the game is achieve objectives. You have 3 stages, and the first stage you'll have 1 objective, at the second stage you'll have 2 objectives, and third stage you'll have 3 objectives. Complete all of those, you win the game. And those objectives vary in terms of what they're trying to get you to do, because there's a huge deck of objective cards, and you'll always just draw randomly from it, and so each game you'll be trying to do different things. And there's always a row of cards, and that row of cards basically represents what you see in front of you. And so it'll be like a statue, or a dude with a shotgun, or, maybe a table that you can flip and hide behind. And you can interact with these things with the cards that you have in your hand. And then when you interact with them, they become part of your next hand. But the things you don't interact with are either going to disappear or go into your discard pile, or even like do bad things to you. So namely, basically, if you don't do anything to a dude with a shotgun, he's going to fire 2 bullets. Those bullets are going to go off into the air, and they're going to get shuffled into the deck that represents the threats that come at you. Eventually, they'll come out and you'll have to deal with them. If you don't deal with them, those bullets end up in your hand. And when they're in your hand, they just clog it up completely. And then you can't, it's like a card that you can't do anything with. And it's such a weird concept. I don't know if I'm describing this well, John, because I've actually never played a game that has this weird mishmash of mechanisms. On top of that, again, it has that thing. The more you do things, the quicker time goes by, and the more cards cycle through faster. And I don't even know how to properly relay this without a visual explanation. So you'll just have to rely on what I'm saying. But
sure, I mean, I haven't played it, but I'm looking at an image of it online, and it's essentially, it seems like these bullets, they just enter this row, and I assume they just slide to the right as you play and you take stuff, and you have to do things before they get all the way to the end, otherwise they hit you and go into your hand?
No, so kind of, almost. So basically, if someone shoots, the bullet goes into the main line's discard pile, which means eventually be shuffled into a deck and come out, right? But when it then comes out, you have to deal with it on that round immediately. If you don't, it'll just go into your hand.
Oh, I see. Well, I guess it's a bullet. It's going to be going fast. That makes sense.
Yes, exactly.
So my question to you is, how does this work with multiple players? Like looking at Board Game Geek, it says that it plays 1 to 3 players, but then it says that the community says that it plays 1 to 2 players, and then it says that it's best with 1 player. So I'm confused.
Well, okay, I'll be honest. I haven't played the game with more than 1 player. I actually sat down and played it a couple of times with myself, and I know there's a co-op mode, and the rulebook says there's a free player versus mode. So I'm not quite sure how that works because I haven't gotten to that part, and I'll explain why in a second. But there's only starting cards for 2 people rather than 1. Now, the reason I haven't gone into it too much is because I was struggling to grasp the game as it is on my own. And not because the game is particularly complicated, but just because so much of it is done in a different way than games have done before. And that is certainly a good thing because it's innovative and it looks at, gaming from, it tries to approach gaming from a different side, right? So, for example, in deck building games, you often think, okay, I'm going to build my deck in a certain way, like we just talked about, right? And it's going to execute a plan. Well, you can't do that in Superhot because your deck continuously cycles. So, if before you were really good at dodging bullets and evading them, and not very good at dealing with the dudes who shoot bullets, that might be the case, but your deck will soon evolve and become something else. And every turn you have to adapt to a different situation and use the tools that you've got. But the tools change all the time, and whilst it's still always the same composition of cards, because there's one deck, and it keeps cycling through, right? And you'll eventually see everything you're able to get very quickly. And not just see, you'll be able to use all the cards that are in the deck, because you will eventually end up with some of them.
Right.
But there's no, cohesiveness. You're not, no matter how hard you try to build around a strategy, you're never going to be able to contain that. It's like lightning in a bottle, right?
So it's a very tactical game is what you're saying.
Oh, incredibly.
Which I guess makes sense. It's a first-person shooter. It's all about the here and now. You're not strategically thinking about shooting that bullet in the future. It's just like, a person's running at me, shoot the gun. Yeah,
you're thinking about the spur of the moment things. And again, that's exactly the way it is in the video game as well. And I find Superhot incredibly interesting. But there's another problem. Not only is it unintuitive, I don't think the rulebook is very good, right? So I've spent my time with Superhot so far just making sure I am playing this solo game fine. And I don't want to teach it to another person to play a co-op game and then go, I'm not exactly sure how this rule works half of the time, because at the moment I'm still playing it and feeling like that myself just when I'm playing it on my own.
Well, how long has it taken to play these one-player games?
I'd say about an hour, but I think it entirely depends on how difficult your objectives are, because some of them can be quite simple and some of them can be quite hard, and some of them can be simple because of the given situation you are in right now, right? Because again, it's all evolving and mutable.
That makes sense. I mean, are you going to try this at 2 players soon, or do you think you're just going to kind of keep this as a 1-player experience for yourself?
I think I'd like to try it because I think it's a very interesting game. And I think if people are interested in Superhot and are interested in trying a solo player experience that isn't necessarily predictable and isn't all about, counting cards and stuff like that, they should definitely check out Superhot, because every turn you are presented with a new situation and you have to deal with it in different ways. And I find that pretty cool and intriguing. And it's the rulebook is a bear. Of course, you can watch a Rado video and, it'll mostly explain everything. But I did find that there are certain corner case situations where I was like, I'm not really sure what to do here. But otherwise, it's a very, very interesting game.
Well, I mean, it's going to be a hard thing to do, to bring not only a first-person shooter, but such a outside-the-box first-person shooter into a card game situation. But it sounds like they did a pretty good job. I think I would like to try this one. I've never played the original video game, but I did actually play this on VR, like virtual reality with the glasses.
Oh, wow.
And,
okay.
It was a intense experience because in this case, it's just every time you move your body that everything changes, and you don't actually move around. You just stand in one place and people run at you, and you can grab bullets out of the air and throw them at you. It's very intense and very fun. And I think if this card game is able to bring in any of that kind of allure, I don't know. I could give that a shot. I mean, it's probably a cheap game, right? I'm looking online. It doesn't seem like it's available yet.
It's not a very expensive game. I believe it was on sale at Expo for £16, which is okay for a game. I mean, I don't think Superhot is going to blow anyone away, right? I just think it's a game that's kind of cool for enthusiasts because it does things in different ways than people are used to. And I think a lot of people will appreciate going, I didn't think a deck builder could do that.
Cool.
Also, can I just ask, the VR thing, do you get to become a different, like in Superhot, you just like warp into someone else's body. Do you get to do that?
No, there's no warping into bodies. You just sit in one spot with like a table in front of you, and these dudes run at you, and you slowly move your arms to pick up a gun and shoot, and then you throw your gun, and then you think you're fine, and then you turn your head, and of course turning your head is also movement. So as you move your head, time goes and you realize there's a dude right behind you and he's already shot a bullet, and can you get your hand from down at your waist up to the bullet in time to deflect it? And it's apparently, I didn't actually watch anybody else play it, but apparently it's really funny to watch somebody play this on VR because it felt like The Matrix, the video game, like just dodging bullets like crazy. But yeah, it was a pretty cool.
I suspect that it's not very fun watching someone just sit and play Superhot, the card game, on their own.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah. Do we have a mailbag, John?
We sort of do. We got an email from E2, and it has to do with the storytelling bit that we talked about in the last episode. And they were essentially saying that they felt a similar stress and anxiety that I do when playing storytelling games. And it's because, well, for some people, it's more natural, they think, to actually come up with these things on the fly and just kind of roll with it. Whereas for other people, like maybe myself and E2 here, it's easy to kind of draw a blank and just come up with nothing. In fact, they liken it to somebody who says they're not good at dancing and then having a good dancer say, well, just give it a shot. And then it's like kind of bad for everybody because they just can't come up with the right dance moves. They mentioned that even a game like Dixit for them is like fun to watch people play, but too stressful to play. And they were kind of pining for a storytelling game where you don't have to make things up. Which is interesting. They mentioned Mafia de Cuba, which is kind of a hidden roles style game, but as you're playing it, you get to choose what your hidden role is. So if you don't like lying, you just take the card out of the thing that says you're not lying. And of course, you probably have to yell at somebody to try and convince them that you're not a liar. But I think it's kind of an interesting cross thing that they have. I mean, I certainly love Dixit, so I'm not quite as not socially, but imaginatively locked up as E2 here sometimes.
I think it's really cool that E2 wrote this email to us because he brought up a very good point that counterbalances a lot of what we said on the last episode about storytelling games and just reinforces that, hey, it's not for everyone. And I just thought it was really important to mention that. I don't want to go back too much into storytelling games because, hey, we did that on the last episode. And if you'd like to check that out, you can go ahead and listen to the previous one. Or maybe you have already. But it's just a nice thing that rounds it all out, I think. And it was nice to mention it on this episode. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to write in about anything at all at lastplacepodcast@gmail.com. And we will be happy to read them out and answer them on the next show, whenever it's on.
Yeah, the next one's going to be episode 10. Shiny number 10. We talked about that's going to be the first time we actually start hosting these onto our own Last Place podcast YouTube channel.
Yes.
You can find a link to that in the description.
In the description.
We're up to 64 people have subscribed to that. So that's pretty darn good considering there's literally nothing on that YouTube page just so far. Also, it's going to be pretty cool getting to episode 10.
Yes.
I'm not sure if we have anything particularly special planned, but we might
I think we do.
You do? Okay, well, we'll just have to tease that one, I suppose.
Yeah, we might have a special guest.
That's true. And having Elaine on last time was fun. It's good having special guests on here because, at a certain point, we might be just tell each other everything. And, they might stop us from doing things like asking people to email us about porta potties.
Exactly.
Or they might try.
I would like to hear about porta potties in board games. But yes, if you're listening to us not on YouTube, but one of your podcast devices, you don't need to worry. Nothing changes. If you are exclusively listening to us on YouTube, this podcast will migrate to a different place, and do find the link in the description of YouTube. It's simple. You'll figure it out, and if you need any help, give us a shout. With that, I have been a person called Efka, who rambled at you for about an hour about board games.
It's true, and I've been Jonathan Cox. And thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.